wanted to let you know that we're going to pass around paper, and there's something that started in the back row. We're going to start something up on this side in the front, and there's 5 sheets total. One is a half a page, so just FYI. Thank you. Keep on checking.
Okay, good afternoon. Try it again. Good afternoon. Still a little weak. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
A little better. My name is Marshall Ganz. This is MOD 377. Wait, at the Ed School, it's also known as the Ed School. A612, Organizing People, Power, and Change. So just checking to be sure you're in the right place. This is our first meeting, and right now we're passing out pieces of paper. You should get a syllabus, a tech info sheet, a summary of requirements, tips on choosing a project, and a student information form, half-page information about a link to go to sign up. And what we're going to do is first just touch on some logistics, and then we'll go over an overview of the class, how we're going to be working together, go over the syllabus, the plan for the semester, introduce the basic concepts we're going to be working with, have some opportunity, I hope, for some questions, discussion, and then set some norms, and then do a brief evaluation. And that's sort of our plan for today. First, let's just see if there's some logistics that we need to get involved. You have, yeah.
Hi everyone. So please make sure, in addition to registering in your schools, to fill in a student interest form if you haven't done so already. So if you're thinking of taking this class and you're registered or not registered, make sure to fill this out. Other than that, we will let you know, hopefully as soon as possible, but by Thursday, if we're able to admit everyone who's interested into the class.
Yeah, we're juggling different schools, different, one Harvard is sort of this aspiration, but it's not a reality. And so we're sort of juggling that together. We know schools have different things. I think we're going to avoid bidding, which is a good thing in terms of Kennedy schools. So we should be able to start letting people know tomorrow or Thursday at the latest, kind of, so we can settle that down. Any other logistical information we need to share on technology, on getting access to course materials?
If anybody has any issues, you can email me. My email address is on that half sheet, masha@gmail.com. Otherwise, the link provided on the site.
And it's pretty clear for people who are Kennedy School, not Kennedy School. All right, okay. So if you have questions, direct them to Masha on there. Any other logistical issues?
And we're passing through an attendance sheet, so
Okay.
make sure to sign up.
All right, good. Just before we get into this, let me get a little sense of who's here. Let's see, who's here from the Ed School? Master student, all master students? Any non-master students from the ed school? What are you? Oh,
I'm a second-year doctoral student.
EDLD.
EDLD.
EDLD, okay. What about other Harvard schools other than the Kennedy School? Let me see. Where? Law school.
Public health and med.
Okay.
Graduate School of Design.
Design.
College.
College. Divinity. Divinity. Oh, we have a divinity contingent right here. A health contingent over there and divinity over here. Good. Other? Yes. Okay. How about schools outside of Harvard? Anybody from where?
Brandeis.
Brandeis? Yeah. Tufts? BU? All right. Okay, yeah. MIT, all right. And how about from the Kennedy School? Let's see. And mid-careers? MPP? Not MPP or mid-career. So that's MPA. Okay, by deduction. All right, we get there. What about, we sort of checked this in shopping, but just, how about from outside the U.S.? See from outside the U.S. All right, let's get a quick read of from where, so you can kind of see this. Where?
India.
India?
India.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Germany.
Germany? Where else?
Saudi.
Saudi?
Colombia.
Yeah.
Brazil.
What? Well,
Brazil.
Brazil.
France.
France?
India.
India. Where else? Israel? Hong Kong?
Ecuador.
Okay. Yeah. Denmark?
Mexico.
Mexico?
China.
China? Yeah. Who do we miss? Canada. Oh, yeah. Okay. That's right. French Canada or English Canada?
English Canada and Romania as well.
Oh, okay. Double whammy. All right. Okay, good. No, and I mentioned this during shopping, but one of the advantages or one of the benefits of the Kennedy School is the opportunity to learn in a cross-cultural context. And so we really welcome the diversity of cultural, political, and historical backgrounds that people bring to learning. It enriches the learning we're going to do, and we actually design sections to kind of maximize the diversity. Cross-contextual learning allows you to actually go deeper into understanding what the processes are, and that's the intent. Well, let me say a little bit about the class. And some of this will be, who was not here for shopping? Okay, so it won't be completely repetitious. All right, good. Because some of this I went over then. First thing about this class is that it's a leadership class. It's in leadership. And the approach to leadership that we're taking here, though, is rooted in 3 questions posed by a first-century Jerusalem scholar, Rabbi Hillel, who, when asked, how do I consider what to do, how to be in the world, responded with 3 questions. And the first question was to ask yourself, if I am not for myself, who will be for me? Which is not a selfish statement, but it is a self-regarding statement. It is about taking your own values, your own motivations, your own resources seriously. If you're going to presume to lead, you better be clear about what you're about, and what you're bringing to it, and why you're undertaking it. So that's number one. But then second, he says, ask yourself, if I am for myself alone, what am I? Because to be a who and not a what is to recognize that we exist in relationship with others in the world, and that our capacity to realize our own objectives is inextricably wrapped up with the capacity of others to realize theirs. Third question he says to ask yourself is, if not now, when? Which is not advice to jump off a bridge. It is a challenge about when it's time to act. And the suggestion is that unless you act, you can't begin to learn what you need to know in order to be able to act effectively. And so that action always entails courage, because it always entails a high degree of uncertainty. And so waiting around for being totally certain, having perfect information, being totally prepared, you're going to wait around for your lifetime. So for me, leadership's about the interaction of these 3 elements of self, other, and action, and how those three interrelate. The fact that there are questions is also important, because it suggests that leadership is less about having answers than posing questions. It suggests that the practice of leadership is less about knowing than it is about learning. And there's a real logic to that, because if you think about the conditions under which we need leadership, is it when everything is working fine? Is it when everything is functioning great? Is it when everything is just in order, no problems, no challenges? It's not when we need leadership, so everything's fine. It's when there's dilemmas and challenges and problems and contradictions. That's when the creative, the adaptive character of leadership is required. And so what that suggests is that when we most need leadership is when there's most uncertainty, when there's most surprise, when there's most novelty. So it suggests then that the domain of leadership is not the certain but the uncertain, which means it's a lot less about imposing control than it is embracing uncertainty and finding purpose through it. And that's really challenging stuff, because you ask yourself questions. Do I have the skills I'm going to need? And that's a challenge to the hands. Can I use my resources in new ways to meet these challenges? It's a challenge to the head. It's a strategic challenge. How do I find the courage, the hopefulness? How do I inspire that in others to deal with the risks involved? So there's a challenge to the heart, to the head, to the hands, all three. And it's all about dealing with the uncertain, with the problematic. And so this is the kind of domain that we're going to be working in this semester. Okay? So the definition that I've come to use for leadership is this: accepting responsibility for enabling others to. So this is not a diva leadership model. This is not leader as sun emanating rays. If you're lucky enough to get close, you get warm. That's not it. It's a form of social interaction, enabling others to achieve purpose under conditions of uncertainty. And so it suggests also leadership being less about being a position. You know, we sometimes associate leadership with positions of authority. Is it your experience that everyone who holds positions of authority exercises great leadership? No. Is it your experience that there are people who exercise leadership who hold no positions of authority in communities, at kitchen tables, all? So they're two distinct things. And so it's leadership less as a position or a person than a practice. In fact, a set of practices. And our course is really structured around 5 practices that are at the core of the leadership practice that we're going to be working on. The practices of relationship building, storytelling, strategizing, action, and structure. And we're going to come back and go over that much more carefully. But that's kind of the idea here. Now, organizing is a particular kind of leadership, particular form of leadership. And it begins with asking the question, the organizers ask the question, not so much what is my issue, as who are my people. It starts with people. It starts by who is it I am engaging with? Who is my community? Who is the people I'm trying to engage? And one way to understand that is there's this quote from DeTocqueville at the top of the syllabus about, in a democracy, knowledge of how to combine is the mother of all forms of knowledge. You know, DeTocqueville is a French aristocrat who came to the U.S. in the 1830s to learn about the emerging democracies there. And he was very concerned about a key problem that he discerned in France, which was the problem of an all-powerful state and radical individuals. He was most concerned about the problem of individualism, and he thought that democracy meant radical individualism. He came to the U.S., and one thing he observed at that time was a rich world of associations, of civic associations, doing the work of associating people one with the other. Because his concern was, how do you govern? How do you have a democracy if there isn't some definition of common interests coming from different places? And he saw associations as beginning to do that work. And so it suggests that the democratic project is not simply about protecting individual liberties, but also about developing collective capacity, common capacity, and common concern. In a sense, you can think of democracy as an experiment in whether the power of people can in fact balance the power of wealth, or whether the more widely distributed resource of time can in some way balance the more narrowly held resource of property, putting it most simply and clearly. Sid Verba, the scholar of voting and political participation here at Harvard, once described democracy as an experiment between whether equality of voice could balance inequality of resources, meaning wealth in his definition. So this question of looking first at people and who are my people and what's the deal there, organizing is focused on that question first. But then the second question an organizer would ask is, what's the problem? What's the problem from their perspective? What is their experience of the problem? What is the need, the want, the need for change? Because there's not going to be any organizing, there's going to be action without some kind of a challenge that requires action. Most of the time we're operating out of inertia, most of the time we're operating in habit, and what moves us to act is something that challenges us. So the second question then is that one, what's the problem? But not just as I conceive it, but as the people whom I'm engaged with conceive the problem to be. What would a solution look like? What sort of goals could we work toward achieving? And then the third question is, okay, how then could the people whom I'm engaging learn to use their resources in new ways to develop the capacity they need to solve the problem? That's crucial, that last one. Because the whole point of organizing is to enable people who are confronting the need for change with the capacity to create that change. That's sort of what sets organizing apart. Organizing is not about providing services to clients. That's a good thing to do that, that's fine. Not what organizing is about. In fact, the word client from the Latin inclinare, to lean upon, to depend upon. Organizing is not about that. It's not about marketing products to customers who, for exchange, like a market exchange, kind of buy the product, don't buy the product. That's a fine thing too. It's not what organizing is about. Organizing is about engaging people in turning themselves and organizing themselves to become a constituency. And constituency, also from the Latin, comes from cons stare, which means to stand together. So the idea is to work with a set of people, a community of people, enabling them to find ways to come together, stand together, work together, act together in order to use their resources in ways that they can achieve their purposes. Now this is at a fairly abstract and general level. Well, this is what we're going to be working on all the way through. And so we're going to keep coming back to this question about people, what's the change, and how are people able to organize in order to produce that change. Now, I want to make a distinction here too between mobilizing and organizing. Mobilizing is like getting people to sign that petition, or people to show up at that rally, or click the mouse. Now, often that's a tactic involved in a process of organizing and change. But organizing is the part where people come together to decide, do we want to do that? Why do we want to take this on? It's the development of the infrastructure, of the relationships, the leadership, and the capacity to make decisions about what kinds of tactics to use. A good example is Tahrir Square, where the young people who use the social media to mobilize very effectively a couple of years ago, mobilized really effectively. But then the fruits of that mobilization went to who? It went to people who had built organizations. The Brotherhood in the first instance, the military in the second instance. And so there's an important lesson there that it may look, oh, gee, this is a really easy shortcut. We can, because there was a time when the only way you could have turned out those numbers of people would have been to build the social infrastructure of leadership and relationships and so forth that would have put you in a position to also claim the fruits of mobilization. So I just want to be clear that we're talking about building organizational capacity in which mobilizing may be one of the tactics that we involve. Last general comment here. When is organizing successful? We have sort of three ways of looking at organizing success. And the first, these are represented over here. The first is, did we accomplish the goal that we're trying to accomplish? I mean, did we pass the law? Did we change the policy? Did we create the credit union? Did we do whatever that change is that we were trying to produce in the world? That's one. But it's only one, because the second outcome is, did our community grow stronger? Did it create capacity it didn't have before? Did it acquire new power it didn't have before? So that's a second outcome. And thirdly, did individuals who were involved in this whole effort learn, grow? In particular, did we develop leadership as a result of it? So it isn't simply about producing an outcome like pass a law, it's also about building the kind of capacity that can be a foundation for subsequent efforts. And often is the reason why the problem existed in the first place. We're going to come back and talk about that some more too. So this is all an effort to just do a general framing of what the course is about and what your projects are going to be about and what we're going to be looking at all the way through in terms of what works, what doesn't work. Now, how we're going to learn. And I asked this in shopping, but I guess I'll ask it again. How many people learn to ride a bicycle? Yes, you can raise your hand again. And same question. Did you learn to ride the bicycle by reading about it? By watching videos about it, by hearing lectures about it? Of course not. To learn to ride the bicycle, the first thing you had to do was get on a bike. The first thing that happened was, all right. And that's the moment of truth there, where you either get back up on the bike, you find the courage to do that, or you go home, go to bed, and give up the enterprise. And it points out the fact that the way, so far as I know, the only way we learn practice is this way. You get back on that bike because you know that the only way to learn to keep your balance is you're going to keep falling for a while. And you're going to try to pay attention more, you're going to try to maybe get help, but you've got to keep trying and falling to figure out what balance feels like. That's how any practice works. And so the whole design of this course is to create a venue, maybe some training wheels or maybe some people holding the back wheel, whatever, is to create a venue in which you can actually do some getting on the bike. And that means you're going to be doing some falling. And that means that it's going to be important that there's support for you to get back up and maybe not fall as quickly the next time. But that's what it's about. So it's not about being perfect from the get-go. And I know often for folks at Harvard, it's a hard revelation that often it's not about an A right away, and it's not about perfection. It's about diving in and beginning to try this stuff. And I'm emphasizing this because we're going to be challenging you to get outside your comfort zone here and try some new things. And if that's not what you have in mind, you may want to reconsider being in the class, because the whole idea here is you can do a course about theories of organizing. Now, we can have lots of theories, but if you really want to understand what organizing is about, you have to understand it at an experiential level. Because it isn't just about concepts, it's also about feelings. It has emotional content. It's about the challenge of asking other people to help you, about asking other people for commitments, about being vulnerable enough about who you are that you let other people see you so they can determine some authenticity questions about your engagement with them. So, and it's about skills. It's about actually doing stuff, like how to have a skillful meeting. I mean, because there's meetings that are lousy and meetings that are skillful. So if you really want to understand what organizing is about, you got to understand the practice. And the only way you can understand the practice is to actually try it. And the only way you can really try it is to risk failing at it in the belief that you can learn. And that's our belief, that you can learn. Carol Dweck is sort of the inspiration for our approach to teaching here, which is her mindset there. We're going to read it on Thursday. We're going to actually, the whole class on Thursday is about learning. It's about our pedagogy and how we're going to focus on that. But in a nutshell, she basically says that if you approach failing at a task as a measure of what kind of person you are, calls that fixed mindset, pretty problematic. If you treat it as a measure of what you've learned, then it's simply a question of what you've learned. And that second approach, which he calls a growth mindset as opposed to fixed mindset, is what we're encouraging people to take in the work we're going to do. So I don't mean to scare anybody, but I want to be, I do want to be clear. So the basic approach here is everybody will be asked to undertake an organizing project. An organizing project will be to determine who you want to work with to achieve what, an outcome by the end of the semester. We have our tip sheet there on how to choose an organizing project. Just look at that for a moment. We're gonna do more. Do you need more of these? Tip sheets? Yeah, there's some over here. We're going to go into this in much more detail on Thursday, but I just want to, strong project is rooted in your own values, values of people you want to work with, and leads to some kind of outcome that you can identify by the end of the semester. Again, here's those three questions to ask yourself. Who do I want to work with? What kind of change do I want to work to bring about? How could I imagine working with those people? And then here's the three kinds of outcomes. This is pretty general. Then there's some, how can I choose a good organizing project? I think the thing I want to emphasize the most is something you actually care about. Because otherwise you won't be able to sustain yourself through the struggles. And you won't really savor the benefits. I mean, it's something that you really, really care about. And something you can imagine a set of people that you could actually work with. And there are projects that people do with organizations or projects you're already involved in. Maybe you may want to continue something. Projects that people do here in the campus or in their campus, projects in the community. There's a variety of different kinds of settings and possibilities in which people can do projects. And we put in the readings a couple of examples of projects from last year. One was a project at medical school to change the curriculum over there with respect to family medicine. And another was a project in the Vietnamese immigrant community about working with children, preschool education in the new immigrant community there. But we'll be working with you about that. So the project. Second is lectures and reading, which you have to have. You're a course, to be a course, you have to have lectures and reading. That will be every Tuesday. And every Tuesday we'll focus on a different theoretical dimension, like strategy, whatever it is. Then you'll engage in a process of reflection, which will be a 2-page paper linking what we talked about theoretically and what's going on in your project. And then on Thursdays, you'll meet in sections where the focus will be on the projects. And 2 or 3 people will present in each section on their project with respect to whatever we're working on that week. And that'll be a way of focusing on that. So it's like a theory practice loop each week that we go through. There's a 4-page midterm where you look at what's working, what isn't working, and why, and then a 7-page final. And that's sort of how it works. That's sort of how it works. Now, This isn't a course in black and white stuff. This isn't a course in right answers. It's a course in struggling with learning some practices that are themselves inherently ambiguous. You know, how much structure do you give something? Do I tell people what to do, or do I listen to what they want to do? What's the balance there? What do I bring and what do I wait for? So it's much more learning about balancing and about how to manage tensions than it is saying, this is the right answer, this is the wrong answer. So that's what makes it interesting. And that's what could make it simple. So, who's going to make it work? Well, the first folks that are going to make it work, of course, are, I went over at the beginning, yourselves, because it's your own experience and your own commitment and your own engagement that makes it work. But second is our teaching team, and we'd like for you to meet our teaching team. Art? He's got 90 seconds, by the way.
Hey everybody, my name is Art Reyes. I'm from Flint, Michigan. So I remember being in about second grade, and I'd call my friends on the phone, and then I'd count how long it took me to get to the phone. 13, 14, 15. As soon as I'd done, I'd run to my mom and I'd report to her, Mom, it took Dan 25 seconds to get to the phone. They must have a really nice house. See, we lived in a trailer park, and I wanted so badly just to live in a house like all my other friends at the school. My mom would look at me with her strong eyes and say, we'll get there someday. This idea that we'll get there someday has been pervasive throughout my family's history. My great-grandparents were migrant workers who settled in Flint, Michigan because the auto factories were hiring. It was their shot at a better life. You know, I'm from a family with a fierce belief in the promise of America, a real belief that we will get there someday. And for all intents and purposes, I was able to. I got a scholarship to go to college. I got selected for a prestigious fellowship. I had job offers that would have paid very well. But for me, we'll get there someday didn't mean just me. So I chose to go back home and be an organizer. And there was nothing like the feeling I would get in a church basement in Detroit or a union hall in Flint, working with people to build strategies to build more power for their communities. I fed off the energy that we might not get there tomorrow or next week, but if we fight together, that we will get there. I've seen the power that organizing can have in developing new leadership and actually leading people. And that's why I TF, because I think that's a really powerful model. And I'm looking forward to working with all of you to get on the bike and fall and get back up. So thank you.
Oh, good. Only 5 seconds. And did you say you're an MPP2?
MPP2.
Yes, MPP2. You're attending. All right, good. Thanks, sir. Masha? Let her know when you're
Des. My name is Masha, and I was raised in a lush green environment under the clouds of the Pacific Northwest in Seattle. But before any of that, my earliest memories are under the hot Adriatic sun, where I slipped and struggled to cross the 16th century bridge in my hometown in Bosnia. The bridge united two sides of my town, and it was a symbol of diversity. And I'm a product of one of those patchwork families. Each grandparent married outside of their ethnic and religious group. Although they barely proclaimed any of those identities under communism, they were Catholic, Muslim, and Christian Orthodox. A couple years after slipping on those stones, war broke out, the bridge was bombed, and it crumbled into the Green River below. Violence raged on as my family watched from afar. I recall staring, puzzled, as I heard my parents contemplate whether or not it was our apartment building that we were watching being shot at on TV. 2 decades later, I decided to move to Croatia, where I was embedded in one of those divided societies. Ready to confront my internal divisions, so I united with a youthful group that was trying to establish a Truth and Reconciliation Commission. It was difficult because of the lingering memories of the war. We faced a lot of rejection on the streets, told that we were working against one's own people. I was a mixed identity in a sea of people who identified as one. But some of the most unexpected people gave me hope, like the Croatian activists who were children of those who took up arms for segregation. Our work was an uphill battle, but the commitment to transcend artificial boundaries and recognize our shared pains inspires me. Regardless of the struggle, the bridge building work continues for us all. And while I can't say that harmony has been restored in my hometown, the bridge has been reconstructed, and I hope to reconstruct bridges with all of you.
And why don't you say a word about what you're doing here?
What am I doing here? Like art, I'm a second year MPP student.
All right, good, thank you. Thank you. Okay, all right. Let's see. You'll see next week why we're doing this timing. You'll get to have this great experience next week. Abel, are you going to?
Hi, my name is Abel Kano. I remember sitting on Maria's porch in Indianapolis all afternoon, waiting with anticipation for my mom to come home. It had been a year since I'd seen her last, and I flew down from Boston to surprise her. Finally, I see her red Chrysler LeBaron pull into the driveway, and I run toward her to give her a hug, and I see the eyes roll back to the back of her head, and she falls and hits the ground. I scream for an ambulance. In the ambulance, they ask me questions. Has this happened before? When did this start? It hurts not to know. I'm only 16 years old and don't have much money, but there's just enough to buy her a ticket home with me. Within the week, she nearly dies in surgery that ruptures a vocal cord and leaves my strong mother suddenly without a voice. I started working full-time to support us, but wanted more than anything to help her get her voice back. There are a lot of ways that we can feel voiceless. Fighting to help communities find their voice has been at the core of my organizing work over the years, from organizing to stop street violence after losing friends, to organizing with Latino and immigrant communities, to practicing democracy as field director to help elect Boston's first Asian American woman to city council at large, and Cambridge's first Latino city councilor. To me, it's all about making our voices heard. I first studied with Marshall here at the Kennedy School through the Latino Leadership Initiative, and went on to use this framework to re-elect our President Barack Obama as organizer for Boston and the constituency organizer for the state of Massachusetts. As TF, I'm very excited to engage with you all as we do the important work of inspiring voice.
Great. 124, well, you had 6 seconds left.
I'll take the 6 seconds.
Okay, Aaron, yeah.
Great. Hi, everybody. My name is Erin, and I'm originally from Chicago, Illinois. Born to an Irish Catholic father who at age 5 wanted to be a priest, and a Jewish mother of Orthodox descent, growing up this was always too complicated for other people. How could you be Jewish with the name Aaron Bailey Fitzgerald, the kids in my Midwestern town would probe? And yet the seeming complexity to others was always a source of pride to me. No one label could ever describe us. This I secretly loved. My family found common ground in the community, though. It was on Friday nights that we served dinner at soup kitchens. Sundays we'd visit the elderly. Quickly, it became clear I wasn't the only one with a rich story behind society's limited labels. I'll never forget a conversation I had one bitter cold Chicago afternoon at the age of 19. Chatting with my friend Lisa, a woman with developmental disabilities, she confided how she felt so bored during the day. In response, I made what I thought was an obvious suggestion. I asked, "Why don't you work?" And in response, she said with this numbing tone, "I can't work. If I work, I'll lose my benefits. I have health issues. I need those." Appalled that Lisa's right to work was stolen because of the label that she wore, disabled, and poor policy design, I set off to DC after graduating college, determined to ensure that policies work in the best interest of people who need them most. Last spring, I enrolled in this course, and it proved transformational, allowing me to understand how to achieve the very social change I went to DC to understand. It didn't rest in me alone, I learned, but in finding power through the agency of others. I'm really excited to be TFing this course and working with all of you in the months ahead, and see as you're motivated by your stories. Thanks.
134, that's great. Good, Aaron. And you're an MPP too.
I'm a second year MPP.
Yeah, good. Involved, yes.
Hi everyone, my name is Inbal and I'm originally from Israel. Growing up in Tel Aviv in the 1990s, bus bombings on my way to school in a gun and uniform MPP seemed quite reasonable. The dissonance became unbearable when at the age of 20, I fell in love. Ido was my first love, so the kind that makes my heart ache with joy. In 2006, Ido's military unit went into a routine Israeli military operation in the Palestinian city Janine. It was around 5 a.m. on a cold Thursday morning while I was still sleeping that a mistakenly shot M16 bullet pierced my boyfriend's neck, killing him almost immediately and shattering my own heart. Friendly fire, they call it. My favorite oxymoron. What could possibly be friendly about fire? What is routine about a military operation? I awoke to an urgent and unacceptable reality that demanded questioning. I found answers in peace building, connecting Israelis and Palestinians, transforming fear into trust and complacency into urgency. Yet my Palestinian friends still stand in checkpoints today, and my 18-year-old sister was just drafted to her military service. Wanting to do better, I came to the US to pursue a master's in coexistence and conflict. Taking the organizing class last year, rooted so strongly in the relationships, the power of relationships between people, my eyes opened to new ideas and my heart to new courage to try them. So now, I'm really privileged to be a part of the power of the relationships in this room and all the change that will come thereafter.
1:27, 3 seconds left. Yeah. Why don't we have an applause for the teaching team there? So these folks will be working with you, and of course, they all had organizing projects, and so that's a good source of support that will be available. The other, let me just say a little bit about my own experience that I bring to this. And maybe at the same time a little bit about this framework that we're going to be working with, where it comes from. I mean, organizing's been around for quite a while. I mean, it's not something that was invented, God knows, at the Kennedy School. It was certainly not invented by, sure wasn't invented by Saul Alinsky, the community organizer. You know, the first organizer I ever heard about growing up was a guy named, well, he was a guy who was organizing bricklayers in a place called Egypt to go on strike, where they'd been slaves and set out on a journey called the Exodus. And his name was Moses. But it is also a truth that this narrative of people coming together, acting collectively to free themselves, to move from slavery to freedom, certainly faith traditions are one important source of this tradition. Also, when the Greeks discovered that they didn't need kings to govern themselves, is another source, the civic tradition, the idea that people could actually govern themselves. Another source is just people's discovery that they could use their resources in ways they hadn't thought before to assert their interests. My favorite example of that is the boycott. Everybody know what a boycott is? Where people get together but you know where the word comes from? It's from a feisty little island. Does that give it away? Ireland, yes. Yeah, it turns out there was a British landlord who had a lot of tenant farmers, and he was supposed to make improvements, and he wasn't making the improvements. And so they decided one day they simply weren't going to give him his part of the produce, what was due. And it went on for quite a while. And eventually he agreed and gave them what they wanted. And his name was Captain Boycott. And so this action of people withholding something that was withholding, the person who had power over them, withholding what was expected from them as a way to assert their own power collectively, became known as a boycott. And that's where that came from. So, and if you go to these New England towns here, certainly in this country, these New England towns have at the centers, you know, there's a meeting house, there's a church, and there's a commons. And you see these sort of three traditions. Now, my introduction to this came in 1964 when I was in my junior year here at Harvard. I had grown up in Bakersfield, California, where my father was a rabbi, my mother was a teacher. Had come here in 1960, which in part was to get as far from Bakersfield as I possibly could. Bakersfield's an oil and agriculture town at the southern end of the San Joaquin Valley, California. And Harvard was plenty far from Bakersfield. If you think it's elitist now, you should have seen it then. You can get a glimpse, you know, at graduation they have, you know, the Geezer Parade. You know what the Geezer Parade is? The Geezer Parade, well, it's called Procession of the Classes. I think it's the technical name. But, you know, it's you know, the class of whatever it is, ought, and so forth. It sort of starts with little white guys who are all kind of like bent over and then gradually stand, you know, like the human evolution starts sort of stand. And then you see the occasional woman, and then you see a spot of color here and there and so forth, and then it sort of changes into what it is today, which is much better than what it was then. But it was both exciting and it was also very scary at the same time, that sort of combination of feelings. But it was here that I got introduced to civil rights work. because the civil rights movement was happening all around us. And it's a little weird right now because this is sort of the 50th anniversary of everything. 1964, 1963 was the March on Washington. President Kennedy was assassinated. The Mississippi Freedom Summer was 1964. And that was actually how I got involved, was volunteering for the Mississippi Summer Project in 1964 when I was in my junior year here. And I volunteered, I think, for mainly three reasons. One was that we had, my father was a chaplain, had been a chaplain in the American Army. We lived in Germany for 3 years after the Second World War. And his work was mostly with Holocaust survivors. So as a child, I met people whose lives had been shattered by that horror. My 5th birthday party was in what they called DP camps, displaced persons camps, only this one was all children. And it was sort of my mother's idea that I should give gifts rather than get them. It wasn't my idea. That's what I did. But I still thought it was kind of cool that it was all kids until I came to understand why it was just kids. The parents had all been killed. And so the Holocaust was a reality in our home. But my parents interpreted it to me as not being simply about anti-Semitism, but about racism, with a simple understanding that racism kills. It's not a complex political, ideological argument. Racism kills. It has, it does, it will. And that's what the civil rights movement was challenging. So it wasn't something way out there, it was something close in here. And you know, I mentioned the Exodus story, but as a rabbi's kid, like a preacher's kid, you got to go to all the stuff, you know? And that has its issues because you're supposed to be perfect. But then again, I love the Passover Seders, which is the celebration of the Exodus story with food, which is kind of cool. And there's a part where they tell that story, but then they point to the children. They say, you were slaves in Egypt. And you say, well, what are you talking about? I've never been to Egypt. I've never been a slave. And it took a while to understand that what that meant was that that story was not the story of one time or place or people, but rather a story that's told generation after generation. You sort of have to figure out where you are in it. Are you with the people who are sort of, you know, are you with those people trying to hold those people back? Are you trying to work with those people that are trying to find a land of promise, whatever their land of promise happens to be? Well, the civil rights movement spoke the language of the Exodus, literally. It was like a reenactment of that story. And finally, it was a movement of young people, you know. Dr. King was, you know how old he was when he led the bus boycott in Montgomery, Alabama?
25.
Yeah, 25. People 18, 19, 20 years old. I was listening to the radio this morning, you know, Pete Seeger passed away yesterday, the great folk singer. And it was actually at a concert of his in San Francisco in 1962 that I first got that the civil rights movement was a movement of young people. He sort of did this medley of songs of the young people standing up to the fire hoses in Birmingham, the people doing the sit-ins that were, you know, 18, 19, 20 years old. And well, it sort of, I actually went out and bought his book, How to Play the Five-String Banjo, and sort of learned to play the banjo sort of a little bit. But that's another story. But, you know, the fact that it was a movement of young people is important because Walter Brueggemann, the Protestant theologian, wrote a book called The Prophetic Imagination, where he says that transformational vision or transformational energy occurs at the intersection of two things. Criticality, which is a clear sense of the world's pain, of its need for change. But the other one is hope. It's a sense of the world's possibility and its promise. And young people come of age with a critical eye on the world they find, and almost of necessity hopeful hearts. And that combination is what links generation change and social change. It always has. And for my generation, it's what linked us to the civil rights movement, so many of us. So I left Harvard after 3 years, went to Mississippi, and that's really where my education began about race, power, and politics in America, I have to say, with all due respect to Harvard. It was so clear that every measure of inequality, housing, healthcare, education, you name it, whites were here and blacks were here. It was also very clear that bringing some medical supplies, that'd be a nice thing. Bringing some books, be a nice thing. Be a good work of charity. You know, it wasn't going to really change anything. I mean, it'd be a good thing. The person who brought it would feel like a good person, and that's a good thing. But we began to learn the difference between charity and justice. And justice is much more demanding. Justice makes you much more uncomfortable than works of charity. Because justice requires that you not just look at the problem and then try to treat it, but you have to ask why. And you have to go deeper and say, well, why is this problem? Why is all this inequality? And so we looked at all those inequalities and we discovered that there was a deeper inequality underneath it all. What do you think that was? Yeah, but racism, racism to turn into all that, what does it take? Huh? Fear. There's a key word here, and I don't want to play hide the ball. This is a key word that we're going to be returning to again and again. It's that 5-letter word that you don't hear much used that much anymore, power. See, it was very clear that this wasn't a circumstance because black people had, quote, accepted it. That wasn't the story. People had resisted. They'd always resisted. The problem was that there was no right to vote effectively in Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, much of the South, for blacks, for African Americans, ever since Reconstruction. Ever since, it was called Redemption, when federal troops came out of the South. And so there was no mechanism of political accountability. Economically, no unions in a place like Mississippi, and certainly agricultural work, working on plantations, was this kind of totally and almost indentured form of servitude. And culturally, I'd never had the experience of going up to someone twice my age who would stand up, offer me his chair, call me Mr., introduce himself with his first name and not look me in the eye because he was black and I was white, and that went on thousands of times a day across the South between blacks and whites at the time. So you put together the cultural and the economic and the political powerlessness, and you begin to understand why all those other inequalities. So that was lesson number one. Want to understand inequality? You got to understand power. Look for the power. Ask the power questions. Ask why. But then you ask it, but then what do you do about it? So some people thought, well, what you do about it is you go to the people with power. You say, hi, people with power, can you fix this? You went to Washington, D.C. Hi, Washington, D.C. government, could you borrow a little bit of your power? It didn't go too well. Come and testify before our committee. Or do some more research. We need more data. We need more evidence, more evidence. That wasn't going anywhere. So it became clear that unless the people with the problem also found a way to author solutions to the problem, to become a source of the solution, it wasn't really going to change. It wasn't really going to change. But there we have a problem because we have a contradiction. Because the reason they have a problem is a lack of power. What we discovered was the difference between resources and power. And that while many communities were lacking power, they're not lacking all resources. The question was how to enable a community to use its resources in new ways to create the power it needed. Now that sounds theoretical. As a concrete example, the most powerful example, the one that really initiated the modern civil rights movement, was the boycott of buses in Alabama in 1955. Initiated, everybody know who Rosa Parks was? Who was she? Who was Rosa Parks?
The one who said no.
So okay, so the way the buses worked in Montgomery at the time, whites in the front, blacks in the back, what they call a no man's land in between. The bus driver was armed and deputized. And so if you're a black person, you walk past the the armed bus driver, past the rows of white people, and you found a seat. And then if a white person needed that seat, you gave it to her. Twice a day, going to work, come home from work. Sort of think about what that does to you. A lot of anger in that community about that. And the year before, the Supreme Court of the United States said segregation was unconstitutional in schools. So the people in Montgomery said, maybe we can extend it to buses, because there's some federal involvement in transportation. Maybe we can do that. So they recruited a plaintiff, and that plaintiff was named Rosa Parks. Now, she wasn't some lady who just got tired one day. She was secretary of the NAACP chapter. She'd been trained in organizing for Highlander School. This was a strategy. But when she got arrested, which was the plan, the women's committee at the college, led by a woman named Joanne Robinson, said, we just can't just watch this. We need to show solidarity. So let's try to get everybody to stay off the buses. And they went to Dr. King and the others, and they said, let's try to get everybody to stay off the buses. And they went to the churches, and they passed out leaflets and all that. And the next morning, the first Monday morning, the buses rolled, and there were no black faces on them. the wonderful description of Dr. King. Nervous, was it going to have to work? And it did. Now what they discovered then was that they had a source of power they didn't realize they had. See, they thought they were going to need to look up for power. They're going to need the courts, they were going to need the Supreme Court, they were going to need all that. But they discovered they could find power by looking down. What do they see when they look down? What do you see when you look down? What do you see?
Feet.
Your feet. Turns out everybody in that community, you know what? They had feet. And if you use those feet to walk to work instead of getting on the bus, and if it wasn't just you, but if it was everybody, guess what would happen? Turned out the bus company needed that bus fare more than the people needed the buses. Their capacity through common action and sacrifice to reveal the dependency of the bus company on them, as opposed to their dependency on the bus company, turned the tables. It took a year, but they won. And that's what initiated the civil rights movement. It was not the discovery that a lawsuit could be won, but the discovery that your feet could take you there. And if it wasn't your feet, it was maybe you sat in a place you weren't supposed to sit. And we won't talk about the part of anatomy involved there. But it was this discovery. And see, this is Gandhi's whole idea that power is interdependent, that it always depends on the cooperation of those who it abuses at one level or another, which means we always have the option of withdrawing. And that understanding about power and how it's created and what it is was fundamental. And so but that doesn't just happen by accident. Dr. King was trained. You know where he learned organizing? Anybody know? At BU, in the School of Theology, no. He actually learned from his father, who was a Baptist minister, and in the Baptist church, you got to be a good organizer or you don't have a job. I mean, that's your congregation. That's like, I know because rabbis, it's the same deal. And that's how it works. The man who, one of the people that started the boycott, E.D. Nixon, was a member of the Sleeping Car Porters Union, the first major black union in America. He'd get on the trains and travel all over the country and learn his organizing, come back to Montgomery. So it took leadership. And so the takeaway for many of us was, this is pretty cool. It doesn't have to be just, from up here or just down here. There's a way people can come together and influence the up here by mobilizing. But it takes leadership, building community around leadership, and building power from community. And that's what organizing was. So I got hooked. And after 2 years in Mississippi, when it was time to come back to Harvard, it just seemed like the most irrelevant thing in the world. I even wrote him a rather arrogant letter saying, how can I come back and study history when we're busy making it? It was actually true. Instead, I went back to California, where I'd grown up in Bakersfield, and Cesar Chavez had just started a grape strike among migrant farm workers, mostly from Mexico. Now, I'd grown up in the middle of that world, but I'd never seen it. I had to go to Mississippi and get educated about race, power, and politics in America, and get what we called Mississippi eyes, to go back home and see this was another community of people of color, also without political rights, also with no union rights. I mean, agricultural workers excluded from all the federal labor laws. And of course, California has its own rich history of racial segregation going back to the turn of the century, beginning with the Chinese and then the Japanese. And so it turns out that Mississippi was not an exception to America, but rather it was an example of the America we needed to change. So I began working with Cesar in 1965, did that for the next 16 years, up until 1981. Another 10 years of unionist and electoral work, and then got invited to my 25th reunion here at Harvard. That was weird, because I never graduated. I never went back for that last year. And I figured, well, this is strange, but Harvard's pretty smart. They figure like 25 years out, whether you graduate or not, you probably have made some money, and you probably have a kid. And the convergence gives you an interest in coming back to Harvard. So it wasn't true in my case, but I was feeling stuck. I was feeling stuck. I came to that reunion. I'd never been to one. It was like running into a 20-year-old version of me that was still here. And 20-year-old me said, how's it going? And I said, I don't know, I'm feeling stuck. Reagan's been president for 8 years. That's okay. Not from my point of view. And so 20-year-old me says, why don't you come back? And why don't you push reset? Why don't you come back and pick up where you left off? Oh, I couldn't do that. I went to see one of the deans the last day, and if he'd laughed at me, it would have been all over, but he didn't. Turned out to be an Episcopal priest. We talked for 3 hours. We discussed the factuation to change a little bit in the intervening period of time. And so in 1991, I came back and finished my senior year, wrote a senior thesis in history and government, graduated class of 64-92. And my 81-year-old mother got to come and see her son finally become a college graduate. They closed that loop. But I got hooked. I came here to the Kennedy School then as a mid-career. I think the only person went from senior to mid-career one summer. And then decided to do a PhD in sociology. And while I was working on the PhD, was asked to design a course on organizing, this course. And it turned out to be a real gift to me because it was a way to integrate my life experience and social science in a conversation with a rising generation. Where it wasn't just a question of war stories, it was a question of tools, techniques, tactics, and how to engage now in the kinds of struggles that we had engaged in then, but in this context, in this time and place. And so I came to think of this gift of teaching as really an opportunity to twice a week have a conversation with the future, which I think is what it is. So I feel very privileged to have the opportunity to do that. So we'll all be sharing our experience, we'll be drawing on these readings, and we'll be working together to create these learning experiences and then draw insight from these experiences of how to act. Now, I just want to quickly touch on where we're going to go. How many of you have ever been in a disorganization? I don't have to define it. We once tried to define it in the farmer course. We said the worst organizational experience you ever had. We came up with this list. Passivity, people not engaged. Division, not difference of opinion, but like those kinds of factions, the kinds of divisions that you know what I'm talking about, the personal, drift. Where are we going? Reactive. Hard time making decisions, but if somebody else makes a decision that affects the group, everybody runs around like chickens with their heads cut off trying to figure out what to do. That's reaction, not response. And they may have resources. They might even have money in the bank of a resource, but they're not engaged. They're not put to work. Does this sound at all familiar? You've had this sort of thing? Now, it's a problem. See, if your power rests on your ability to act collectively and act together, it's a big problem. So then we said, well, what's a really positive experience? Where things really worked well. Well, we came up with this list, that instead of passivity, people were active, people were actually engaged. Instead of division, there was unity. And again, by unity, I don't mean everybody agreed with everybody, but I mean there was a capacity to make decisions and act together on those decisions. There was a sense of purpose instead of drift. There was initiative. People were moving the ball forward. And resources were not in action, they were actually being applied to the work of change. They were actually being deployed. So then the question was, what's the difference? And when I was with the farmer groups, we did this boycott of grapes, and we had at one point 43 boycott operations all over North America. And we kind of did this thing trying to figure out why some were working and some weren't. And we had lots of theories, where the unions were strong, where the churches were strong, where students were strong. Every environmental theory we found exceptions to. There was only one theory we didn't find exceptions to. What do you think that was? Made the difference. Huh? Well, organization, but as a function of what? What do you think? Here revealed for the first time. Look, there it is. No, what we discovered, and I want to be clear, this is not like there was somebody with a wonderful personality. That's not what we're talking about. There were pieces of work that were being done there that enabled that group to work well. If there was activity instead of passivity, there was motivation. People were motivated, which is sort of what the power of narrative is all about. It's about the translating values into the emotional resources for motivation and courage and so forth. If there was unity instead of division, it was someone was working at building relationships. Relationships weren't just random. They weren't just sort of whatever. There was an intentional and purposeful effort to construct relationships around shared commitments both within and without as sort of the fundamental piece of work. If there was unity, or if there was purpose instead of drift, there was a structure for making decisions, for coordination, for accountability. There was structure created that created the space in which to do that. If there was initiative instead of reactiveness, strategizing was going on. Not just like one time there was a 5-year plan and then nobody ever thought about it again, because it happens, there's a little divergence, usually a little bit, usually the first day. But there was ongoing. And if there was change instead of inaction, it was, change instead of inaction, it's because the people figured out how to use their resources in very concrete, specific ways to achieve whatever it was they were trying to achieve. Now, these 5 sort of practices of relationship building, narrative, motivation, strategy, strategizing, taking action, and structure are sort of the bedrock of what we're going to work on. Now, there's 2 other pieces that connect with this. One is, and that's what that illustrates. One is, where is it? This one here, time. Stephen Jay Gould, the paleontologist, wrote a book called Time's Arrow. He talks about understanding time in 2 different ways. He says, one way is the rhythm of what he calls continuity, which is like the annual budget review. The annual, he says, that's time as a cycle. But he says change has a different rhythm. Change, he describes as treating time as an arrow. It has a beginning, it has an end, it's discrete and intense. Now, we know that as campaign time. How many people have been in a campaign of any kind? A political issue. What do you notice about a campaign? What's different about a campaign? Urgent. It's urgent. What else? It's time limited. What else? What else? What else about a campaign? Always more to do. Campaigns are a way of structuring effort and organizing time. First, it creates urgency, yes. It also creates thresholds. Thresholds of accomplishment. And it's usually staged, like, well, to achieve that thing we need to achieve at the end, we got to first recruit our volunteers. Then we got to train them and deploy them. And then we got to have those people reach out for more. It's kind of like working through phases. Because the premise is that we don't wait till we have a grant from someplace to start. We begin developing our resources as we're doing the work. And that's sort of the idea behind campaigns. These projects are going to be like campaigns, with a foundation, a start. There'll be various peaks along the way, and then there'll be an outcome at the end that you'll be working to achieve. The other piece is this over here, and this is the sort of basic approach to leadership that we'll be talking about more as well. How many of you have ever been in the position of that dot up there? He raised his hand without before he even finished. Well, what's the position of that dot up there in the corner? What do you see in the dot? That dot up there. What do you notice about it?
Centralized.
Yeah. What else? Huh?
Sort of a hub and spoke. Like everybody's dependent on the center.
Yeah.
If the hub is gone, then the spokes.
Yeah. How does it feel? Huh? Does it feel great? Really comfortable? All that stuff. Whoops! All that stuff coming at you. I don't know. Have you been in that situation where it's kind of you and everything's pointing at you, and then it looks like nobody wants to help, and then the more help you want, like nobody will help, and then there. Or have you ever tried to work in that situation where the other person's the dot? Where you want to do something, but they, they mainly talk about how nobody will help them. And you know what I'm talking about? See, that problem of sort of thinking that leadership is about being a dot and about controlling everything is one of the biggest challenges that we face in building organizations and in organizing, is understanding that leadership is not about one person telling everybody else what to do. That's the old way of looking at things, and it doesn't work very well. It's broken down in so many different domains these days. Sometimes we are so angry about that we go in a different direction. It's not effort, we go in a different direction of just, well, we're not going to have any dots at all. We're all the same here. We don't have any structure. We're all equal. Have you had those kind of deals? How's that work? Now, see, that's usually what the sociologist Joe Freeman calls it the tyranny of structurelessness. It's like it gets chaotic. Well, there's a middle ground of interdependent or collaborative understanding of leadership. And that's where we're going to focus our effort, is on the interdependent idea. Like this, sort of looks like a snowflake. Maybe there's a dot, but it's working with about maybe five others who are working with others who are working with others. It's a distributed form of leadership, in which leadership is actually collaborative and shared. And that's sort of where we're going to be focusing. It's the key to organizing. Because organizing, social movements don't work with one, despite what the myths are, you know, the charismatic leader and all that, that doesn't work like that. Dr. King was never sitting in a control room telling everybody what to do. That's not how it worked. There were hundreds, thousands of leaders in the civil rights movement. And Dr. King was a significant leader, he was one among many. And so we have these myths that mischaracterize how this actually works. And so, you know, if you're doing an organizing project, one of the first things you have to think about is, who is going to lead with me? With whom am I going to share leadership? Who is going to be my leadership team? How am I going to create a team of people to be able to do that? We're going to be working with you on that. Now, if you do that, what you get is this. I use this chart a lot, and then I had a student from Venezuela who came in. She said, that's a very boring chart. She said, yeah, look, I got a much better idea. What's that? I said, it's this. What's this? Well, see, it's like this dot. See, it's very clunky here. Doesn't move. That's when it's a dot. But if you let other people lead, then you get this. Wow. Oh, yeah. It's pretty cool. Yeah, you got all that space, and people can grow and develop, and if you hold up your part, it holds up the whole thing, and on with this little visual metaphor here. But it's called a Hoberman sphere for those that are interested. But it does represent what it is, how this stuff is supposed to work. You're supposed to build this kind of thing. So that's what we'll be working at doing with you. Now, the syllabus, we don't have time to go through in detail. So I just want to point out a few things about it. It's long. This first week has a whole lot of reading. We didn't expect you would read them by today. But over the next couple of weeks, read them. They're background for the whole class. And we have little letters. T means this is a theoretical piece. The way you read theoretical pieces, you read the beginning and you read the end. And then depending on your interest, you go into the middle, okay? Practical pieces are sort of how-tos. And then historical pieces are rich in detail. You want to read those because those are like cases. And so we designate which one is which so you can kind of adjust your reading expectations to that. In this first week, it's a mix of things. And then there's a few short articles about recent organizing, like Dan Cantor's operation in New York City that helped elect the mayor down there. Or domestic worker organizing, which has been very successful around the country recently. California just won a domestic workers' Bill of Rights. And then the NRA, which has been extraordinarily effective in blocking any gun legislation of any kind. Also based on a very effective grassroots organizing. People that look at the money in DC as the NRA, they're missing the point. You know, 13,000 local gun clubs all over America. That's how to understand where the power is there. So take a look at that. Thursday, we're going to focus on pedagogy, on our learning, on the projects, and so forth. And that's what this launch week is. Next week, we get into narrative, into the way to think about this is your organizing project. There's why you want to do it, and then there's how you're going to engage with other people. And so next week, we're going to focus on the you part. And sort of what's motivating you, and for those of you that have, anybody taken public narrative in here? Okay, so you're all set. You can help others. It's learning to communicate through narrative why you care about what you care about. You're going to need to do that to be able to communicate to others. We're going to focus on that next week, and we also will meet in sections for the first time next week, and the sections will be designed by then. And then on Saturday, a week from Saturday, we'll all get together from 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. over at NIE ABC at the top there. And we'll go through the whole class in 6 hours. Only it won't just be at NIE ABC. You'll be forming some relationships with new people you haven't met. You'll try to come up with some common interests. You'll tell some stories about why you care about them. You'll have a chance to do some strategizing. And you'll figure out what you can go out and mobilize people around in Harvard Square for an hour and a half, which you will then do. And then you'll come back and debrief. And the whole idea is to move through these 5 practices and see how they interact with each other. And the other point is to dive in the water and just like, let's get it over with. Let's get in and let's do this stuff. And it's fun. It is fun. It's not terrifying. The following week, we focus on people-parent change, and that is the basic contours of the class that I touched on today and the project specifically. And that week, we'll also have the first of our skill sessions on coaching. Coaching is going to be a fundamental practice. We're going to talk more about it on Thursday. The following week, we'll then focus on relationship building. And our clinic will go on one-on-one meetings and how to do that. The following week on structure, and that's going to focus on leadership teams and how to launch them. And our skill session will be on that. The following week will be on strategizing, and that'll be sort of checking back in to see where you are along the way, what you need to change, adapt, what you've learned. That's going to be about adaptation. And then action, how it actually turns into the mobilizing part that we've been talking about. And then it's time for midterm and spring break. And midpoint check-in and retool and so forth, and come back energized for check-in in the second half. The second half is all about integration, how these pieces fit together. We'll be reading cases and looking at projects, mainly for the second half. And then at the end, we'll focus on what it takes to be a good organizer, and it also will focus on what this means in the big picture, because a lot of our focus here is on micro skills. Because to sort of see the big stuff, you kind of have to see what it means in the concrete and in the reality. Otherwise, you're just sort of looking from 30,000 feet. You're missing. You got to be able to see what it's like right here, and then go to the 30,000 feet. And that's kind of what our intent is. And that's how the course wraps up. Now, we're going to do some norms for how we're going to work together. We'll do that next time. We'll do that on Tuesday. So we only have a few minutes here, so let me just take a few minutes for some questions. And let me say, today has been much more lecturing than will be the norm. But questions, comments? Yeah.
If we have some ideas about a particular issue we want to approach during the semester, will we have an opportunity to get some feedback on it before the end of the week, or before registration closes?
Well, you'll be able to, the way we'll set it up is everybody will be assigned to a section, and one of the first things that will happen will be a one-on-one with the TF, who will work with you on helping to design a project. And so I'm not sure if that meets what you're asking.
No, so I have a very specific idea of what I would like to do, and
you want some feedback.
And it's something I'm already involved in.
Oh, good.
So it's if it doesn't fit the structure of, or the kind of issues we work on, then it wouldn't, like, personally, it wouldn't work for me to take on another issue.
Well, let me ask you: does it involve organizing people around here?
Yes.
I mean, people around this area.
Yes, it's Harvard specific.
Oh, okay. And does it involve an outcome that you could focus on by the end of the semester?
Uh-huh.
Okay. And you're doing pretty good so far. And would you be getting these people to do something?
Hopefully.
Now let me just ask, what's the outcome you want?
Well, I'm working with a group of students from across the schools who want to get Harvard to participate in a White House initiative to promote interfaith cooperation through service work.
Oh.
So getting the president to get Harvard enlisted among the number of colleges already involved in this.
So you want to get Drew Faust to adopt a particular policy?
Yes, and so it's not necessarily a problem. So it's not like we're trying to fix something. We are trying to achieve. We're trying to do something better.
Yeah, well, that's good. Yeah, good luck.
Okay, great.
Presumably, there's a reason why people should take from their precious time and help you do this.
Yes.
And presumably, it's important enough, and there's enough at stake that people will see it that way. Do you see what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And that's going to be your job, to sort of challenge people and make it significant enough that people are going to want to really engage with you in doing it. No, but thank you for that. But that's helpful. We're going to have more time on Thursday do more examples like that of projects and things. Let me just, before we break then, what was most useful today in what we did? We do just these little pluses and deltas. We're not going to have a lot of time today, but what was most useful in this session today? Yes?
Like the personal narratives.
The personal narratives, the TFs, yeah.
I like the
The visuals, what else? Yes.
Dad, what is it called?
This, the Hoberman sphere?
Yeah.
Like that, yeah.
Behind it, and I'm going to Amazon that.
Yeah, okay, good. All right, what else? What else? What would have been more useful to do today? Yeah.
I just like hearing all the TF stories and your story, your own narrative.
Okay, so that was the plus.
That was helpful.
How about deltas, things that would have helped you? I think clearly more time to talk about possible projects.
Or hearing about what they did last winter.
And hearing about their projects. No, excellent. Yeah, well, we can do that on Thursday, I think. Other thoughts on this? Yeah,
More questions next time.
yeah. So Thursday we will, yes.
More about the process of developing the project.
Okay, good. Good. You're making our Thursday agenda. This is terrific. What else? Yeah,
I think a lot of, well, what you said was fantastic. A lot of it was interesting.
yeah.
So maybe try and balance a little bit more. So opening it up for questions for the other departments.
Yeah, I hope we're going to be able to do much more than that. Okay, thanks very much. We'll see you on Thursday.